All right. Well, welcome everyone to our, let's see, fifth or so educational event hosted by Fellow Environmental Partners. At Fellow, our mission is to address orphan oil and gas wells, legacy wells from an energy industry in a way that incorporates research and builds strategy around decommissioning opportunities. So thank you all for joining us. We have a really awesome speaker today, a question answerer today. Justin Bliffen from Brigade Well Services is here with us. Brigade is one of the largest well servicing outfits in the lower 48. And Justin is a stand-up guy with a great background who runs an awesome company. So Justin, I said before this, I won't do it justice if I don't give you the opportunity to chime in here, but why don't you just take a moment to introduce yourself before we dive into some questions?
Sure. Thanks, Staci. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. That introduction was more than gracious enough, I think. But look, I've got the honor of being at the helm of this company. We're a private well servicing company, a small sector of the complex microcosm that can be the oil and gas industry. Essentially, our core business is capital equipment and personnel, people that work on life of well services. So it could be anything from new well construction and completion to kind of our bread and butter and what most people think about when they think of the workover rig sector, which is life of well production oriented, workover oriented work, whether that well is lives to be 7 years or 37 years old, all the way to plugging and abandonment, end of life, so to speak, for oil and gas well. My own background is a diversified energy leader. I used to be in the service as a young man and been in various energy roles for the last 12, 15 years, everything from the capital markets side to the upstream E&P side, and of course here into the service side. I've got a real passion for the U.S. Energy industry and reducing our reliance on foreign barrels of oil and increasing our own quality of life, and I think it's a virtuous cycle and a often vilified but very much necessary industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the most important things I know to both Brooke and I, who Brooke is kind of producing this video in the background for those that don't know her, is to address that villainizing of oil and gas. We really feel passionately that we cannot make the energy transition without oil and gas folks, without kind of leveraging that expertise. So I'm glad to hear you say that. I know the military is a big part of your background, so I'm sure I speak for a lot of folks when we thank you for that service and thank you for being here. So I'm going to try and break this up into sort of three parts. I want to talk first a little bit about Brigade and kind of the status quo of well plugging. We are going to focus on the plugging sector of your business. And then I want to introduce kind of the infrastructure bill and some of the dollars that are being granted to the states to address orphan well plugging and how that might shift the environment a little bit. And then I want to look way ahead, kind of out into the landscape of the future and talk a little bit about how you see Brigade kind of shifting alongside maybe an energy transition or what you're looking to in the future. So a couple quick questions here to set the scene for all of that. I want to the best of your ability, how many rigs and crews are currently out there working specifically in the plugging and abandonment space? Is it hundreds? Is it thousands? Nationwide, what do you think that looks like?
Sure. I'll start first with my core sector, which is well servicing sector, which, as I just described, a subset of that is P&A. This is the core asset to a P&A or to well servicing sector is something called a workover rig or a pulling unit, or a service rig is another word for that. And this is a rig count that is not tracked as accurately and precisely as, say, the Baker Hughes drilling rig count. And it's also a much more expansive and highly fragmented sector than, for instance, hydraulic fracturing fleets or coil tubing units and so forth. So There's one organization out there that does try to track it that I'm involved with, the Energy Workforce and Technology Council. The numbers I'm going to give you are a little bit bigger than the numbers they're currently reporting on. But I would say there's somewhere around 1,500 polling units running in the country today. Call it 13 to 1,700. And so some quick back of the envelope math would, get you to about 7,500 to 10,000 field level employees that are any given day engaged in this space, in this sector in the lower 48. Now, how many of those, 7 to 10,000 people are actually doing P&A? In my business, any given day, and we're a top 5, we're probably the 4th largest well servicer in the U.S. Operate out of 6 states, work in about 10 states. And, any given day, 10 to 25% of our business is involved in P&A. So if we were to do some real broad brush strokes and real sloppy math here, you could say maybe there's 150 to 250 or so crews any given day, and about 10 to 20 or 25, probably 10 to 20% of that 7 to 10,000 person workforce that might be engaged in a P&A activity any given day. But that's a lot of interpolation there.
Sure. Well, and to give you and Brigade a little plug, I was going to show this to the audience. Of all of those rigs that Justin just mentioned, I believe Brigade Energy Service to be the first to provide a sustainability report. So the first of its kind here, and a huge step, I think, for the well service sector. So congratulations on that. I know that just came out yesterday or today, but I'm sure that was a big effort for you guys, and one that does not go unnoticed, at least where I'm from. So congratulations. Of that kind of well servicing sector, that P&A piece specifically, to the extent you can kind of focus on that, what does that workforce look like? You talked about a lot of folks. Is it a diverse workforce? Is it non-diverse? What's that demographic look like? And then maybe even expand on that, Justin, if you would. What do those jobs look like? Are those quality jobs? Are those safe jobs? Are those high-paying jobs? Are those people getting benefits? Talk about your employees a little bit and what that job looks like.
Sure. One of my favorite things to talk about. First off, thank you very much for the mention of our sustainability reports. Our inaugural one, a lot of team effort and energy to put it together, and we're super we're super proud of the effort, and more importantly, proud of the heavy lift and the efforts ahead to get more work, more rig hours, more production, more productivity and optimization for less GHG, for less emissions. As well as all the the meaningful initiatives that we're doing on the social and the governance front. And the last thing I'll say about that real quick is I think that a lot of good companies in every different industry were doing tremendous ESG work before it was mandatory or popular to do so, and that's what I kind of speak to in my CEO's letter. And I think Brigade is one of those outfits. So although it can be it can be an eye roller, frustrating to think about, ESG initiatives. I like to flip that on its head and think about a lot of the really costly efforts that we've been doing at Brigade that sometimes don't have an economic, a clear, tangible economic return, and take a lot of resource and human capital and real capital. And heretofore were unrecognized or underappreciated. The ESG framework really gives us a framework to promote those efforts and shine them up and kind of tell folks about it. So anyways, that's what's in our SR. And I hope some of the viewership here gets a chance to read it. And it's great that we're doing this interview on the very morning that we published that and put a press release out on it. All the way to your question. So first off, a brief mention, besides the workover rig, on a P&A, there are, of course, some other assets and personnel and skill sets that come to bear. Sometimes, and it depends on the job type, but normally that could be what are called wireline units, which go down a hole and sometimes cut casing and do some different, set plugs and do some different things. There are cementing units, which involve high pressure hydraulic pumps, as well as blender units. There is, lifting equipment, whether it's front loaders and forks and heavy trucking. And so there's a lot of stuff that comes to bear on any well site operation, and certainly in a P&A operation, there's no exception to that. The personnel and the demographics are, really just an amazing group of individuals across the industry side. As you know, Staci, in our space. I can't speak to the entirety of the sector, but I can speak to our demographics as the fourth largest well servicer. We're about 70% non-Caucasian, people of mixed race or color. We ages, we've got from 18 years, I'm talking field level, 18 years old to in their 60s. And you'd be surprised how some of those folks that are towards the back half of their career can run circles around sometimes some of the younger folks, because they grew up in an era where we didn't have hydraulic tongs and lifting equipment and machines to do a lot of the work that a younger generation does.
I've had circles run around me, in fact, by some of those older older folks.
Oh, so have I.
Yeah,
no
right.
question. Yeah. We are, at the field level, and it depends on the service side, a little bit more so on the rig side than maybe wireline or trucking, but we are heavily male, dominated, probably 90+% male for most of the field roles. And here's a good one, and a pitch that I'm doing some advocacy work around. Look, where the oil field goes, not only does diversity follow, but prosperity follows. And, here at Brigade, our average employee makes somewhere around $75,000 a year. And within a few years of one's career, you can be making at or above six figures. And, in a job and in a business and a company that very much wants to, develop your competency management and give you career development of real skill sets, not just technical skill sets and physicality at the wellhead, but soft skills and leadership skills and problem solving skills and communication skills as well. And then the last thing on demographics, there is some regional differences. There are parts of the country that have some demographic differences, given the history of how the oil field has evolved and matured in those regions.
Right. So when we hear things like job creation as a part of the infrastructure bill, we're talking about really high quality jobs here, as we can bring people into this industry and help develop their skill sets. I think that's a big part of one of the, what we need to be doing here. So the last question to kind of set the stage is, and I won't make you walk us through what it is to plug a well. We actually did an educational event pretty early on kind of a 101 well plugging, but how long would you say it takes to plug a well? And I know that'll vary, so give me an average. And the reason I'm asking is because on the infrastructure bill, some of these dollars have some time constraints to them. So, it helps me get there on the math.
Right. So, the average, there's, the sample set, and there's definitely going to be some outliers in there, but I would say the average is anywhere from 2 to 6 days, 3 to 5 days. Most wells that are of a vintage that are being plugged, which is a big part of that, because more wells that are older wells, shallower vertical onlys, are the ones being plugged now, and those are easier jobs perhaps than a modern unconventional, which is a much longer, more complex wellbore. But 2 to 6 days. Now there are definitely some problem wells, some outliers that can be 2 months, 3 months, or even longer, depending on what's going on downhole, and
right.
As well as what information you have when you show up at the wellbore. Some wells have great title and chain of custody and data and information and what you're going to face when you get into the wellbore, and some might be many decades old, might be in the Orphan well program and don't have any information on the history of the vintage of the well.
Sure. So as I look through this sustainability report, I'm looking on page 13. 2021, Brigade plugged approximately 700 wells. That's a really big number, Justin. That's more than most states plug annually. That's a really big number. So thank you for that work. I know that's really meaningful work, and a stat I wanted to throw out there as well. So now let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill and kind of what we could kind of anticipate in the near term that doing to business. So just first, what percentage of the plugging work would you guess at, and maybe you don't even have to guess, but just talk through it, is done on behalf of the states, and then kind of, which means plugging orphan wells. And then what's the difference in doing a job for the state versus doing a job for the operator to you as, as a business person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think an important one for kind of where this conversation is going. Last year, of the 700 wells that we plugged last year, less than 2% of those were for the state or orphan wells. We'll plug over 1,000 wells this year, and it's going to be the same stats, less than 2%. We are, so therefore, we are paying for our existing customer base,
Right.
E&Ps, exploration and production companies across the country, whether they're large and public or small and private, or anywhere in between, are our customers. And those customers have new well construction that needs to get done. They have existing well improvement or fixes that need to get done. And then they have, well plugging and abandonment liabilities and obligations that need to get done. And so, our usual customers that we're doing for most of our work are the ones that we are often doing some of the plugging for. The differences are many. Sometimes the state wells kind of come and go. Depends on the state and the field and so forth. Whereas our existing E&Ps have much more consistency and transparency of load, which is really important to running these lean businesses well. And they are also, they're the leadership and the people and the supervisors that we know, their contractual terms that we know, their payment terms that we know, there's indemnification and risk transfer that we know and are used to, and their fields and well designs that we know and develop expertise and specialization in. And so that might lead some of the later conversation. And then a couple other comments. Right now, my business and most of the well servicing sector is there's not enough service supply for the demand that's out there. If you would have asked a year or two ago, certainly that would have been a very different answer. But right now, as we sit in this part of the cycle, you could, I think it's a safe bet to say that the country needs 25 to 50% more pulling units and pulling unit crews, really the crews, than it currently has. And that's without the orphan well program. That's just the natural, cycle of the industry. And so, and we'll get into these numbers, I suspect, in a minute. If we need a lot more crews and units to engage in a really scaled up and accelerated, national orphan well program, well, that's a real challenge where we might have to displace, existing customers that we value very much. These customers are folks that we try to earn our keep on and make them happy every single day. And so walking away from those customers to go work for the state for some period of time is kind of a big ask. And then the last thing I'll say is sometimes, not always, and maybe often it's not even appropriate, but the states go through their regimented bidding process, and they are often going to hit the lowest bid and the most available crew or company, which might not always, again, I'm broad brushstrokes, might not always be the best crew or the best option for that respective work. Somebody who's chasing state work because they don't have existing customer bases that are asking for 25 to 50% more of their rigs, is that who we want executing on the 80,000 wells that the government wants plugged?
Right, understood. So it sounds like the next question I had written down here is actually whether or not you anticipated an increase in kind of rigs and demand of rigs and crews given these federal funds. It sounds like not only the answer is yes because of the federal funds, but it sounds like we anticipate an increase in demand even outside of federal funds, even just as demand grows and as some of these wells age. I think we've looked before, and the peak rig count was in like 1981, I think. And so as you can imagine, a lot of those wells, the end of life of those wells is kind of coming near. And so is that any other comment on that? Do you anticipate that kind of a demand shift, and how do you think about orphan wells in that picture?
Yeah, well, I don't have that data in front of me. You might have been referencing the EIA data, but yeah, so in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, there were something like 4,500 plus pooling units running. And I just gave you a number moments
Right,
ago that was more around 1,500.
right.
Now, there's another conversation to be had around the iron and the iron that is out there, the status of the fleet, which if we have time, we can get to. Um, but yeah, it's a very different world than it was, 40 plus years ago. Um, Maybe is this a good time to kind of talk about that math of the money to wells to how many crews that would be?
Yeah, let's absolutely do it.
Yeah, and you and I have talked offline previously about this, and you put some great demographic or some great graphic infographics together around that. Excuse me. And this is some, again, broad brushstrokes, but 4.7 billion. And obviously there's going to be some administration fees. And another component is not all of these dollars are going straight to orphan well plugging. There's a lot of site reclamation and cleanup and tank batteries and flow lines and targeting and
Yep.
all sorts of other stuff that those dollars would be well spent to. But if we just dial it down from 4.7 to 4 billion for easy math here that we don't even have to have an infographic on to try to keep up with, $4 billion. If we were to deploy that over 5 years, say we want to try to do this in 5 years, if we make it 10, we can divide it by 2 at the end of the exercise.
Yep.
So that's $800 million a year to go into this. I just lost my lights here in my room. There we go.
Lighting.
Yeah. It's because we've got green sensors turning our lights off here in our office.
There you
So
go.
$800 million a year, and $800 million a year. If we say that the average well is somewhere around $50,000, again for easy math, then that's 16,000 wells a year to plug. Taking it back the other way, just to check, does that make sense? Well, 16,000 a year times 5 years to deploy it would be 80,000 wells. Right now, the EPA has said they think there's over 80,000 wells of these specifically targeted, and there might be as many as 2 million that are unlocated and non-specifically targeted. But if you're trying to get the targeted ones, then it kind of makes sense, 16,000 wells a year. Okay, so what does it take to get 16,000 wells a year knocked out? Well, if you go with my earlier 2 to 6 days and just call it a week, a 5-day, Monday through Friday week, then one crew can knock out a well in a week. And let's call that 50 a year, taking out holidays.
Yep.
And so 16,000 divided by 50 weeks in a year would mean that you need 320 crews. 320 crews. And if there's 1,500 running, then we're talking about 20 to 25% of the existing well servicing supply to go knock down, some variation of this orphan well program in 5 years, and half that over 10 years.
Right. And the obvious point here is we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, right? We don't want to stop doing the plugging work that we're already doing. We need incremental rigs and crews to come in and meet that demand.
Yeah, and of course, everything I just talked about, it was all about service supply and the practicality of the crew count and the rig count. We didn't talk about GHG and actual emissions reduction at all.
Right.
And so really, what you want to do is you want the most bang for the buck and, target the most emissions and knock those out as efficiently and optimally as possible. And so I know that, various parties, including ourselves, are trying to, tackle that. And I think that here at Brigade, we'll have teams and an entity that can help kind of target and optimize for GHG reduction, optimization around well plugging and abandonment.
Absolutely. We talk a lot at Fellow, and we've talked even with Brigade some about how do we take a strategic approach here. I don't think anyone believes the $4.7 billion to be sufficient to plug all of the wells. And so what we really don't want to have happen is turn around in 5 years and have plugged the wrong half. So, that piece is pretty critical. And I know you guys are trying to do your part there as well. So going back to that kind of increased demand, are there rigs that are kind of stacked away in a yard? Are there employees available, potential employees available that have the skills needed to to supplement your existing crew so we can grow to meet that demand?
Yeah, the first part of that question, the rigs and stacked rigs, iron is not the problem, specifically on the workover rig side. Now, if there's 1,500 pulling units running in the country right now, there might be another 3,000 or close to that are stacked or sitting on a fence line in some condition, whether it's cold stacked or warm stacked or however the respective company defines that. Some amount of upkeep capital, recertification going into that unit to bring it back into an active status. And many of those inactive rigs aren't necessarily cold stacked. They're ready to go. They're just sitting on the fence line because they don't have the crew. On the other iron, I think wireline's probably in a similar state. If there was a shortage on the iron side, it might be around cementing and or in some places certain types of well control, but mostly cementing. It's the shortage. The limiting factor is really the personnel, the labor situation, and this is not a type of work that you necessarily want to send brand new people, have crews of what we in industry call green hats or brand new short service employees. It's absolutely appropriate to have one or a handful of short service employees on an experienced crew, on an experienced operation, but you can't just staff the entire, it would be hazard on top of hazard to just have all new people pouring into this type of work.
Right. I was going to say, you talk a lot in your sustainability report about safety and how important that is to your business specifically. And I would imagine having experienced personnel helping train green hats is a big part of what you do. And so maybe the follow-up question here is, how do you train those people? How do we get people to man those rigs to meet demand?
Well, just a little bit on Brigade, and then maybe more importantly, more broadly, what do we do here? Part of our, just as we talked about in our inaugural sustainability report, truly 5.5 years ago, part of our founding was not just around delivering economic return to our stakeholders, but we really wanted to ambitiously evolve this well servicing sector, a sector that we felt like had a lot of room for improvement. We wanted to do that on two main fronts. One is kind of data side, and the other is on what I would call the competency management side, and really attacking the service quality via competency management is what I should say. Really attacking leadership, training, culture, process, and system through various initiatives. As we started to try to build a world-class training and competency management system, we had to create some doctrine because, believe it or not, there, in this many decade old industry sector, there isn't real great doctrine that's out there and established. There's certainly certain things out there. The one I always point to is lockout tagout. Any oil field service company has some copy and pasted version of a lockout tagout confined space policy. But what I really mean is the specific skill sets around being well servicing experts. And so we had a multi-year effort that we've been trying to summit and continue to work our way up it around, we brought in subject matter experts from all over the country, folks from private companies, small folks from large public companies, some ex-Navy SEALs and folks that understand hazardous environments and elite culture. We partnered with groups like PetroSkills and others, and even brought in technical writers to help kind of start putting this together. And a lot of the material just comes from manufacturer instructions on assets and equipment and engineering spec and what have you. But really just to create doctrine from which to build, true competency management from. And there's a lot of that in our sustainability report, and you can find some of that on our website as well. More broadly, and maybe more importantly, for how does industry and how does the country come together to staff this right now without displacing, 150 to 300 existing crews that we earlier talked about? Right. Well, I think that it needs to be a couple things. We started with this, and I hate to go back to it, but we need to, I'm all about energy transition and expansion, but we do need to do a better job at multi-levels of ending the vilification. It's hard to bring good people into this business, in this industry, or any business or industry that is critical, with so much of that out there. And it is true, that very much applies to young people looking for, their career options. And this can be a very good career with very good prospects and fulfillment and advancement,
Right.
and prosperity building. And so, I think that's step one. And there's a lot of efforts that we could do to better that. Step two, I think we need to partner. Government is not going to, in my opinion, not going to have much success in trying to solve all this on their own. The government should not start running pulling unit businesses. They need to lean on industry. They need to lean on the subject matter experts. They need to, hand in hand, work together to solve this. And one good way to marshal industry resources is to go through some of the trade organizations which represent industry. So I'm involved with one called the Energy Workforce and Technology Council. Leslie Beyer is the CEO. She's wonderful, and she and her organization represent over 450 companies, 600,000 plus employees, and 49 out of 50 states in the union. And that's a great, those type of organizations are great places to start for the government, partnering up on trying to take on something really big and really scaled up.
Yeah.
And then, maybe the last thing I would say is, just like we value out of our big and existing customers, open communication and transparency and consistency. And consistency is the big word there. That would be important in big scaled up programs between industry and government. If it is a bigger project with longer time horizon, then we can kind of plan and we got a lot, and we've got a fair amount of lead time to prep and ramp and build for that appropriately, as opposed to inappropriately and just throwing, assets and people at it. Then I think we all have a greater chance of more scaled up success.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I am going to kind of skip over to the last part of this now, which is the looking ahead piece. One thing I want to say about your sustainability report, you asked me before we started recording if I had any feedback for you. I wanted to tell you that two things I really like in your sustainability report. I said this before. It's very authentic, and I think that's powerful. It's wonderful to say these things. It's a whole nother thing to do them. And Brigade kind of hits on what you can do, and there's a plan in place, and there's some really tangible things there. So I think that's great. The other thing I thought was really great about it was you kind of you honed in on some of the sustainability development goals put out there by the UN, and I thought that was really a holistic way to approach this report. And so I thought both of those things were very commendable. Now, on the looking ahead kind of section of this conversation, if you will, I want to think, 5-10 years into the future, almost kind of along parallel to like a Paris Agreement. Some of these people are putting out net zero 2050 kind of numbers. So as we think about those, how do you see your business shifting, changing, morphing alongside those kind of timeframes and with some of the goals that folks have put out there?
Yeah, well, first off, maybe for the second or third time in this call, we are pro energy expansion and transition, all forms of purpose-built BTUs for the application at hand. And the cleaner, the better. But there is still a role for high BTU dense hydrocarbons, even in a 2050 net neutral world. So transition is defined differently by different groups and folks, but I think about transition as transition and expansion. And I am all about green and the cleanest energy, but good luck building a windmill without any petrochemicals or diesel engines. That is, to kind of, simplistically drive the point home.
Yeah.
What's that? Sorry.
I think it's important to say those things out loud. Honestly, net neutral does not mean zero hydrocarbons.
Right. So I see our role in a couple different ways. And again, today our sustainability report went out and we talk a lot about that. So check out that and check out our website where we also go into it a bit. But you can't fix it if you can't measure. So we went out there. This is a voluntary effort. It's kind of putting yourself out there a little bit to start reporting on what your emissions are going to be and what your safety record is and all this kind of stuff. And in this tough largely private sector. But we just said, hey, we'll try to take a little bit of a leadership role and put ourselves out there and commit to improving it. And when we say we're trying to make advancement across E, S, and G, but the E is what a lot of garners a lot of attention when you're in the energy industry, and especially the hydrocarbon industry. And we have to divide our emissions by something. And here's something that I've been again talking about a little bit. Our industry has done a wonderful job of creating more BTU, more energy per emissions over the last 15 plus years. And the stats I'll kind of throw at you, and you can check me later, is in our country we have increased energy production by about 100%, 104% over the last, I think it's 15 or 16 years on the EIA. That's about 30 quadrillion BTUs to 60 quadrillion BTUs. Over that period of time, and most of it is oil and natural gas, followed by coal, and then your collection of cleaner techs. Although natural gas is obviously a very clean burning fuel source, BTU source as well. And over that period of time, when we doubled 15 years our energy production, we did not double our GHG or emissions. We did not increase by 50% or even 20%. We're actually net down. We're net down. And that's me quoting the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES, which you would know better than me, who are the best people to quote there. But they say that in that same time period, we've reduced emissions by 11 to 14%. And in our country. And so that's a really awesome story. I think it's come from two main fronts. One is switching from coal to natural gas. That's the lion's share of it. But a lot of it is just natural market-driven efficiencies in the oil and gas landscape. And here's my anecdote. Here's my anecdote real quick, if you allow me. In the Bakken, the first well that I was involved with that many years ago that we drilled was a 75-day spud to total depth. Spud to TD is what that's called, about a 4-mile well in rock more dense than concrete. About a year later, that was from 2011 to 2012. Most of those wells were done, and same wells were done in about 35 to 40 days. About 4 years later, in 2016, it was kind of 10 to 15 days. Fast forward all the way to 2022, and those wells are being drilled spud to TD in 8 to 11 days. And so that's the same wellbore that has had a tremendous, and when it's drilled in less days, that's less big diesel engines and drilling rig, and regardless of what the power source is being used. In addition to that, that's just the drilling rig. Every aspect of the completions has gotten more optimized and more efficient, more stages, more energy production, for less emissions. And unfortunately, as an industry, we didn't weigh in. We didn't weigh in 15 years ago. So bringing that all the way back to your question, okay, we were 15 years late to the weigh-in dance, and that's really a shame because we've created so much efficiencies, energy per emissions over those 15 amazing years, driven by American ingenuity and engineers and hardworking folks out in the field. But we can still measure in now. We can still weigh in now and drive efficiencies year after year, and go show the world what we can do.
Absolutely. And it brings home the point, if nothing else, I hope listeners take home the point that it takes some very bright people to make those kinds of leaps in the time frame that we're talking about. And again, we ought to pull those people into the conversation as opposed to kind of pushing them away. So kind of a good segue to the next question, which is, what are you seeing on the service sector? Again, pretty specific to plugging and abandonment. from a technology perspective? Are there new ways to plug that we should be thinking about? Are there other ways to utilize some of these wellbores that we ought to be thinking about?
Yeah, great question. Look, there's always what one thing that drives innovation is incentive, right? You know, we got to have incentive to truly drive innovation, in my opinion, and I don't think that's controversial. And as you know, Staci, in an E&P company, or our valued customers, sometimes P&A isn't like, if you're a young engineer out of School of Mines or what, Texas A&M or whatever your engineering school is, you might not want to be. What's that?
University of Tulsa. I'll just put a little plug in right there.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Like a hoorah, but very good engineers.
You might not want to be tasked on the P&A projects, because P&A projects are liabilities, they're obligations that have to be done by the respective organizations and companies. Whereas if you're tasked on the new well drilling and completions, and you're creating that story I just told about optimization and innovating and driving, and you're making money, you're making money for the organization, there's a lot of upside. If you're on the P&A side, there's not a lot of upside, there's infinite downside. The downside is if you have one of those problem wells that doesn't take 3 to 5 days, but it takes 30 to 90 days, you've got nothing but downside. And you've got, the only upside is good job, you got your job done on time, on budget. That's it, And so P&A specifically hasn't been a space that has driven efficiency, innovation as much, because it's not a profit center, it's a cost center. And it's just a liability and obligation that has to be done. Obviously, you can always improve cost centers, but the pound for pound investment per return might not be there. Now, that being said, across well servicing in our business, which of course includes P&A, I would say two main fronts is where we're trying to innovate and evolve. One is data, all things data. If you can't measure it, you can't fix it. And that's everything from company-wide data that is being internal data that's being cross-linked in more sophisticated manners with more powerful analytics, a whole new version of yesterdecade's database, which is also has some AI learnings in it, to wellhead data and collection, rig data capture, and same thing, linking that up, and then even cross-linking that with some of the internal data and coming to more powerful, outcomes and decision-making. So that is one big push. And another big push that we've just kind of relit the fuse. We were advancing this pre-COVID, and then kind of got put on the back burner, and now we're advancing it again. And that's camera technology. Cameras and AI again are moving at light speed, no pun intended. And I think there's just wonderful applications for any hazardous surface operation for cameras driving higher efficiency, service quality, and ultimately safety performance.
Right. Okay. So I want this, I just have two more questions. The last one I want to leave to talk a little bit about culture, but this one, play out this scenario for me, because I think this is the approach some people will take is, what if, Justin, we said Brigade, let's forget about any kind of fiduciary responsibility type argument for a second, but what if Brigade takes all of the rigs that it's using to do well life things, productivity things, workovers, recompletions, things like that keep wells producing? What happens if we take all of those rigs and we move them over to end of well life services? For example, plugging wells and decommissioning, addressing things like orphan wells. You are a big enough company and have enough rigs in the space for that to be a meaningful shift in the industry. So just play that scenario out for me so we can kind of play devil's advocate to that argument.
Yeah, so we step away from a nice, healthy, diversified customer list of valued industry players that we worked for years to work only for the government.
Let's say.
Yeah. And so what, you just want me to comment on what does that world look like, or
In my mind, there are unintended consequences to every well-intended, even decision or path that we may go down, and those are oftentimes hard to think of. So, for those of us that aren't in the service sector and that might not be familiar with what those unintended consequences could be, I think it's important to not only think about all the reasons that my great idea would work, but also some of the reasons that it might not work. And I guess that's what I'm asking for here. Why wouldn't
Sure,
that?
yeah. Yeah, and as we talk about all the time in Brigade, it's easy to be a problem provider. It's way more challenging, but helpful to be a solution provider. Yeah, lots of unintended consequences and unintended side effects here. First off, for any enterprise or group of enterprises that were doing that, and whether we were moving 100% of our work to that, or 5 organizations were moving 50%, or 100 organizations were moving 5%, whatever the math is, you want some consistency of that work, and you want to place, once you do a good job and at some point you complete it, you get to a finish line or a near finish line, you want to have a home and a place for those folks to come back to. And so, this could be the genesis of a solution. I'm not necessarily putting this forward because there are unintended consequences to what I'm about to say as well. But if some pardon or time was given to state mandated P&As of solvent existing E&Ps,
Right.
with some kind of connection to freeing up those crews to go do orphan well work, with the understanding that those crews are then going to come back to the E&Ps, which got more time, that could be, a big, potential way through. But, back to the beginning of, us Brigade's just going to work, and do state orphan wells for some number of years. There's a lot of risk to that. There's a lot of risk for us organization, or anybody taking that on organizationally. Just like we wouldn't want to put all of our eggs in one basket with one valued blue chip customer, the same comes with the state. And there's some, as there's some additional risk and unknown and uncertainty that comes with the state. No good deed goes unpunished. You think you're trying to do something really good, and ultimately the incentive breaks down, and you're kind of totaling the bag at the end of it would be some thoughts as well. Yep.
Okay, so then the last question I have for you, and then we'll shut it down, is about culture. And I want to talk specifically about culture with you because I think you've built a really cool culture throughout Brigade, and it's often hard for sort of office culture to flow all the way through to field personnel, and that's something you guys have been successful with. So when if you could use a few words just to describe your company culture, and then how do you leverage that culture that you've created to affect the communities that you live in, that you work in, that your kind of day-to-day life affects? How do you build on that company culture?
Sure. Thank you for that question. There's a lot of stuff around our mission statement and our core values, both in our sustainability report as well as on our webpage. So brigadeenergy.com, and you can get to all that stuff. And we try to, have some of that come through the screen and the words, so to speak. I came to well servicing as a frustrated consumer of well servicing. I just felt like it was such a important sector in this in our ecosystem, and yet it could be done so much better. Even though I had something like 9 out of 10 mentors try to steer me away from going into well servicing, too challenging, too hard. But as I've always said from the beginning, the challenge is the opportunity. This is a sector ripe for disruption, ripe for improvement. And if we can move the needle in that direction on things like training, the workforce, competency management, career development, and data, then there's a wonderful opportunity to be had there. When we talk about changing, service quality, improving service quality, you have to attack culture. We really do a lot of focus on leadership. We can build big systems and processes, and we're trying to build some pretty, world-class systems and processes around well servicing. But that takes time. And sometimes our customers don't have time. I've got 100 rigs out today that, we can't wait for months, quarters, years to build some grand system. And so a shortcut, the cheat sheet is leadership. You can really, really, really focus on the leadership and bringing the leadership to a level that maybe they haven't been exposed to. And so we do a lot of training of all various forms, from formal leadership training down to immediate action drills at the wellhead. We have we believe in a culture of extreme ownership and accountability of leadership, which syncs up nicely with, I think, the G of ESG, and really excellence. Trying to be known and recognized as not the largest, but the best at what we do, and in a national franchise, so that if our customer calls us out in Williston, North Dakota, or Victoria, South Texas, they know that they're going to get a high spec rig supervisor, a well-trained and accountable crew chief and crew, as well as a fully certified and operational set of assets for what is a hazardous operation, not a dangerous operation. It's not dangerous, it's hazardous, but the hazard can be risk mitigated through leadership, training, culture, process, and system.
Perfect. Okay, Justin, well, we'll end it for now there. I hope, the reason we reached out and wanted to talk to you today is because you exemplify that leadership quality, and we appreciate that from fellows' perspective. We also think it's really important to hear voices like yours, boots on the ground folks, representation when it comes to what does it mean to plug a well, how does this work, and how are we really going to make a difference here with some of the dollars that are coming down. So we really appreciate your time and your effort, and we hope that your voice is amplified in having this conversation and continue to keep us in the loop. I told you before this, I'll say it again, so I'm holding you to it, that I want fellow to be on your page 17 of your sustainability report when you next bring it out. So I look forward to a lasting relationship with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Staci. Thank you for the kind words and the platform today, and thank you for your industry leadership and all that you're doing. It's wildly important, and I look forward to continuing that relationship. And of course, thank you to our field employees out there every day, 650 plus of them, working hard in the elements today, and our valued customers.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Staci.
All right.